To start, we would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this webinar in Mi'kmaq. This is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Maliseet and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1726. We feel it's important to keep this in mind and know and honor the land that we are on. The ICN works with many communities across Canada, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities, as well as communities around the world in the international development sector. And we feel it's important to reflect on this, draw lessons from our colonial history, and how this history intersects in many ways with the issues we are facing today in working towards a more just, equitable, and just sustainable world. I would like to introduce and welcome our moderator, Sydney Pigo, her. She is a social impact leader, researcher, and advocate for gender equality and social justice on global scale. She is currently the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives at Meta Canada, a national organization with a mission to accelerate world-class mentoring for youth. Welcome, Sydney.
Thank you very much, Solange, and thank you for having invited me to facilitate this session today. I wanted to begin in French, simply to say that our session today will take place in English, but as usual, we have simultaneous interpretation available between French and English. If you have any questions in French, please feel free to pose them. I'll be happy to translate them for our participants, but I wanted to start on that note, and we will continue the rest of our conversation in English.
So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today, and thank you, Solange, for the introduction. I just mentioned that our conversation will be in English today, but if you do have questions in French or in English, feel free to share them with the Q&A function, and I'm happy to translate for our panelists today. And we also have interpretation available, so feel free to listen along in French or in English. As Solange mentioned, my name is Sydney, and I'm joining you from Toronto, Treaty 13 territory. And I'm very excited to moderate this conversation on AI and global solidarity with some incredible panelists. I'll start by introducing them before we move on to our first question. First, we have Renji Boutalid. Renji Boutalid is a technology and policy executive at the intersection of AI ethics, financial innovation, and public interest. He is the co-founder and director of the Montreal AI Ethics Institute and editor of the State of AI Ethics Report. As vice president of business development at Metrica, Renji leads strategic partnerships with major financial institutions, regulators, and asset managers to advance risk management and compliance in digital assets and blockchain. Next, we have Nelson Kwaje. It's actually the second time I'm moderating a panel with Nelson, and he is a South Sudanese technologist, media producer, and digital rights advocate with over a decade of experience in technology, governance, and civic innovation across East and Central Africa. He currently serves as the chairperson and acting executive director of Digital Rights Frontlines, where he leads initiatives promoting online safety, data protection, and responsible digital governance. Nelson is the founder of Sinus Hub, a creative and technology space in Juba that supports youth innovation, art, and entrepreneurship. Last but not least, we have Shi Kanyete. She is the head of AI at AIverse, a pioneering platform by esoteric strats advancing AI adoption and training across Africa. In this role, she leads strategy and innovation, helping institutions, businesses, and NGOs integrate artificial intelligence across their systems, from research and strategic planning to real-world implementation. Beyond her work in AI, she is an experienced communication strategist who has partnered with founders, leaders, and mission-driven organizations to craft human-centered narratives that inspire action and impact. Thank you so much for being here as our panelists. I'm really excited, and I want to give you more time to chat about all the amazing work that you're doing. So our first question is going to be for all of our panelists. And the question is, as AI rapidly advances, what opportunities and dangers do you see for advancing justice, equity, and global solidarity? Perhaps we can start with Shi for your answer.
Thank you for your question. I think for me and for where where I sit currently, I feel like we are living in a time where AI isn't just transforming technology, it's transforming more of power, access, and agency. And when we talk about justice and equity and even solidarity in this space, for example, it's more about how do we get who gets to participate and who gets left behind. And so for me, from where my work is or where what we do exactly is to see that businesses integrate AI responsibly. I see both incredible opportunities and serious dangers. So like, for example, one, on the opportunity side, we've seen how we can localize tools and translate things like legal rights to help people understand their rights better. And so this becomes we kind of like building data ecosystems with people in mind, not just to profit from them. And then also we've seen collaboration across borders. And then now we go to the dangers. One of the dangers that we've seen is that if we're not careful, AI will continue to widen inequalities because those tools and infrastructure, as they surge ahead, many people are going to get left behind. The second one is about data colonialization. Because sometimes when you look at who trains the data that is being used, that's another issue that we have. And then finally is we risk losing control of how we represented on our sides and whose stories and cultures are seen as data worthy and who gets to choose that. So for me, I believe that as we advance justice and solidarity, we need to really look before we take that leap. And it means we really have to help people integrate AI more consciously with context, because I believe AI should make us more human. That's how I can answer that question.
Thank you, Shi. I think you spoke really well to your communications experience, your human-centered storytelling, as well as your tech experience. It's really important that we mesh the two, because at the end of the day, it's humans creating this technology, so it still does need to be human-centered. I'll pass it over to Renji. What are your thoughts?
Hi, everyone. So, Sydney, thank you for a nice intro, and pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon. So in terms of opportunities and dangers, for me, two things come to mind. There's a huge opportunity to democratize AI ethics literacy. That's a mission statement of what we're building at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute. And what this really comes down to is building civic capacity to participate in governance. We're at a pivotal moment where AI governance frameworks are being written in countries across the board. The way that we see it is that the opportunity is to ensure that these aren't just technical standards imposed from above by industry and government, and I'll have more to say on that later on, but frameworks co-created, and co-created is a key word here, with the communities most affected. In terms of the dangers, it comes down to the widening participation gap between industry and government on one hand, and civil society and communities on the other. And so what we're seeing now, governments and corporations, they're consistently framing civil society and public participation as a procedural requirement, a checklist, and a compliance checklist, rather than essential to democratic legitimacy. And here in Canada, an example would be the recently announced AI strategy task force that exemplifies this in many ways. 27 members, very industry heavy, with a 30-day consultation sprint. And so largely absent from this AI strategy task force are civil society, labor, environmental experts, and communities that are most affected by AI systems. And I just want to say a few things just to level set. When we talk about AI systems, we're really talking about these socio-technical systems, right? So the technical systems, not just software, LLMs, but it's also the hardware, the data chips, the data centers, and the vast amounts of electricity and environmental resources that they use. But also on the sociological side, the socio side, it's the people, culture, values, and organizations as well too. What we're doing is we're building the governance architecture for AI while systemically excluding the voices that would center justice and equity. And so the result is that policy, it looks good on paper, but it doesn't address real world harms. When you design policy without the people who live with its consequences, policy that misses real harms and overlooks community needs, we know that policy will fail.
Thank you, Renji. It's actually really great that you mentioned that because I know there's a lot of folks here who were joining us yesterday for part one, and there was a lot of conversation around this community-centered approach and how we make sure that that's part of the conversation when it comes to AI use and policy. So really excited for you to dive deeper later on today. And finally, Nelson, what are your thoughts on this question?
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, a lot has already been said, but for me, whenever I think in terms of the opportunities, it's mainly because I come from the tech side. A lot of it is in reducing the barrier to entry, especially for communities. When you look at the way the internet has been designed, it's mostly the interface, the user interface of all the devices is mostly very much for like Latin characters and languages that are written. So all these devices, you need a certain prerequisite to kind of interact with it. But also you look at people with disabilities, people who are visually impaired, or you look at people with autism and all this stuff. The internet in the way that it has been designed or technology, it is very not favoring to this. So one of the opportunities is AI can reduce this. So you find that discussion lies around eliminating the user interface or even the touch screen, because it will reach a place where like we are now interacting with the device in real time using whatever language that we have, and the device listens to those commands and does what we want. And I think that also goes into discussion around literacy, because a lot of the discussion that we have here is a bit different, because one of the things we challenge people here in the work that we do, people are like, hey, people need to be educated in order for them to. I'm like, okay, so what if they're not educated? Does it mean that they should not access services? I think that's actually a very important question. So there are a lot of barriers that I think AI can help, especially in terms of indigenous languages, languages that are not integrated in the internet, and also people with disabilities. So I see a huge opportunity here in terms of reducing this, and leave alone this, but also we're just accessing services. I go through airports, and every time I go through an international airport, I just see, especially people who do not speak English, they're like really struggling, especially through self-serving counters or passing, changing a flight. The whole system is just, but now you can see through like real-time interpretation, people can have the agency that they need in order for them to feel dignified and autonomous. So there are a lot of opportunities in that side. On the flip side, when you look at the dangers, I think inequality is one of the biggest dangers, because what you see now with the advent of AI, the capitalism wants to serve capital. So a lot of the innovation, a lot of the investment goes in a very horizontal way to create things that are serving the interests of capitalism. It's not that even if some things are cheaper to make so that everyone can be accommodated, I don't think that's the incentive that makes these companies to move. So there is a scenario where we have people talk about automation, for example. People like, automation will mean the workers get to have more rest. But I think a lot of the time it means less workers. It means more people not having jobs. It should have implied that the people who exist can probably work less hours and get better pay. But that is not how technology moves at times. It can mean eliminating all of that, automating everything, and getting more money to the people who want more money. And I think there is a danger that the inequality might increase, and probably the people at the bottom might not get a share of this commonwealth of AI prosperity.
Thank you, Nelson. That actually reminded me of a talk that I went to with Jeffrey Hinton when he came back to Toronto after leaving Google. So some people are familiar, but they call him the godfather of AI, and kind of somebody who won, I think, the Nobel Prize last year for foundational research on advanced neural networks. So I think one of the main things he was talking about is how that inequity, that inequality is very hard to address. And he said exactly what you said, that companies are not incentivized to address that inequity. And I just saw today an article about how Amazon is planning to replace, I think they said 600,000 workers with some of this automation. So definitely a huge challenge. And hopefully we'll get to dive into a little bit more of, what those challenges are, but then also some maybe solutions that we can talk about as a group today. But thank you so much to all three panelists for sharing your thoughts. Now we're going to move it on to some individual questions so that you're able to dive a little bit deeper into your specific work. And we're going to start with Renji. My question for you is, how can civil society organizations be better equipped to meaningfully shape just and inclusive AI systems and to influence global AI governance processes?
So thanks for the question. At May at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, we think about governance quite a bit. And so thinking about, in preparation for this webinar, I'm going to outline 5 key areas, and then I'll dig into the ones that I think are the most urgent. So number one, I've made mention of this, literacy as infrastructure. What this really comes down to is building civic capacity to participate in governance. Number two, it's resourcing participation. So actually funding civil society organizations to engage and co-create, and not just inviting them to consult. And I'll have a bit more to say on that. Number three, strategic capacity building, and outlining the different types of strategic expertise that civil society organizations need, from technical literacy and policy literacy to strategic coalition building and evidence generation. Number four is also taking a step back. It's changing the governance processes, so fixing broken structures and not just helping civil society organizations navigate them better. And what I mean by this is that by default, industry has seats at the table, so should communities. And then number five, it's really learning from what works. Models already exist. We need to scale them. And so focusing on 2 of them, literacy as infrastructure. So Canada, according to a recent KPMG University of Melbourne study, ranks 44th out of 47 countries in AI literacy. And so I think our take at May is really when people can't participate in AI governance because they lack the literacy to engage, that is a democratic deficit. And when you talk about AI literacy, it isn't just about teaching people how transformers work or how to code. It's about understanding power, right? So I think that's the root of it. It's about being able to read a governance framework and understand, as a civil society organization, where to intervene. It's about knowing when a policy process is happening and how to make your voice heard. And so one of the things that we've outlined and we've called for is countries really need national AI literacy strategies. At May, we've called for an independent office for public AI literacy embedded within the federal government. So this is an independent office of for public AI literacy with dedicated funding for community-led training initiatives. And so, even at May and the work that we do, we've seen how making complex AI governance concepts accessible through the biweekly AI ethics brief, now it's reaching over 19,000 subscribers, can shift who gets to participate in these conversations. And so the second is resourcing participation and not just inviting it. What I mean by that is that governments are asking civil society organizations, at least in Canada, to participate in a quote unquote 30-day consultation sprint with no compensation, while industry stakeholders show up with dedicated policy teams and lobbyists. And in other words, they're well funded, right? So that's not a level playing field. So if we're serious about meaningful participation from civil society, what we need to do is number one, participation funds. So direct funding for civil society organizations to hire policy expertise and conduct real community consultations. Number two, extended timeline. So real consultations take 6 to 12 months, not 30 days. And then number three, I think this is, really, really important, but it's moving from extraction to co-creation. So let communities shape the questions we're asking and not just answer the questions government has already decided on through their quote unquote consultation sprint. And so this connects to, point number 4 that I made about changing the structure of governance processes altogether. Industry has seats at the table by default. Communities should too. We do need, we need mandatory civil society representation, transparency about who's lobbying whom, and actual accountability when consultation input gets ignored. And so for us, the bottom line is that we already have models of meaningful participation, right? So municipal AI governance experiments, data cooperatives that she had mentioned earlier, worker-led auditing, Indigenous data sovereignty frameworks. So these exist, they work. So why are they systematically excluded from mainstream governance processes? Why are they ignored? And what would it take to make them standard? I think that's the question I'm also putting out to the audience today. And then, a question we'll also be asking on our end as well. So I hope that frames our perspective.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Ranji. And I will make sure to put in the chat as well the AI ethics brief that you're sharing biweekly, because what we definitely learned from yesterday is that more information needs to go out to community civil society organizations. And I really appreciate how you mentioned the kind of broken consultation process. Like, not only is it short, not only are certain people systemically excluded from that conversation, but also it's consultation within such a small box. You know, how much space do people really have when the agenda's already been set? So I really love the way you brought that up and spoke about co-creation. And we'll dive into that a little bit more, but I really appreciate your reflections on that. Oh, perfect. So the folks at ICN, they shared the report that's going out soon. So next I'll pass it over to Nelson. I have a question for you. Amid growing digital repression and disinformation, how are youth, civil society, and the communities you work with resisting injustice and reclaiming AI for social good?
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, today I'm just from a civil society meeting on disinformation and misinformation with a group of civil society actors from South Sudan and Kenya. Answer is that they are not coping well, because remember, the civil society is kind of very wide. The area of civic tech, has less organizations than other areas, just because of the technicality of it, the way that civil society draws members. A lot of the civil society, I don't know how is it in Canada, but it is very lawyered. Here, a lot of people are doing lawyers, legal, humanities, and all this kind of stuff. So tech is a new thing that is kind of creeping into this space. So civil society organizations are trying to cope up with that. And more often than not, they also stretch beyond their core mandate, especially because of disinformation. We've seen here, like, disinformation is being deployed by the state actors and non-state actors to shape public opinion on core issues, whether it's an issue of conflict, issue of advocacy for rights, and issues of like one of the things that we see in East Africa, a lot of the organizations that are funded by, let me say, the Ford Foundation, there is a huge misinformation, or they're funded by Open Society Foundation. I think probably maybe this is something that people in the Americans can relate to. They are being labeled as Western agents of they want to subvert societal beliefs. They are anti-religion and what. So if in such campaigns now you add AI to it, it really makes the work of civil society very hard. In areas where I work, now we have seen a lot of women, they get attacked online through different misinformation campaigns, civil society actors, like especially my organization, we have a program called SafetyCom. We provide cyber safety hotline, especially for civil society members. Yesterday, I had someone who came to our office. There's a conflict in his community. It was a political conflict. He's a civil society member. Someone went and created a page impersonating his name and started sending a lot of politically divisive messages. And that led to death threat being sent to him. He called me. I was like, okay, it was end of the business day. I was like, can you come tomorrow? He's like, no, I need to come now because it's literally threatening my life. So we deal with a lot of frontline civil society actors who are facing this. These issues already existed, but AI just exacerbates them. And especially in communities where literacy and information literacy is low, it is very hard for people to detect and to be able to identify misinformation and disinformation campaigns that are being kind of leveled against them. We're doing a lot of solutions with this, empowering these communities, fact-checking, and also trying to demystify this. But here's the challenge, which I'll leave the audience with. I think that's a question that I ask a lot of people. I think fact-checking, the way that we're doing it, is trying to look at the content intrinsically and identify that this content is false. But at the rate at which that AI is going, we're losing that. Very soon, there will be, like empirically speaking, there will be no distinction between what is false and what is true. If you look at the value of the content itself, whether it's audio, AI can clone the voice. If you look at pictures, AI can do pictures almost as realistic. And it doesn't help that people even enhance their pictures using AI. So very soon we're going to run with the tools that we have developed to detect, as a way to call them, detection tools. So now we have to seek other avenues of trust and other avenues of fact checking. And I see that we're reaching that end very soon, especially with audio and voice cloning. I think we're already there.
No, so that was really great point to end on. I hope that folks who are listening will put together some questions to ask you later. But on the flip side of that, I think I mentioned this yesterday. I was watching these TikToks of this young woman who's at Harvard and studying AI, and she was very critical, but she said she's an AI optimist. And one of the things she was saying that might help us with like deep fakes and things like that are being created is that AI, if AI is generating all of this content and humans stop generating the content, it will decrease in quality a lot faster. Whereas if people aren't continuing to contribute, it'll like cannibalize itself in a way. So that was one of the things that she was exploring around how that might be starting. But I think we're still a pretty far way away before that will start to happen. So I think now's the time to act. I really appreciate you putting that call out to everybody who's here. So I'll pass it on to Shi for your question. From your work supporting AI adoption across African institutions and communities, what lessons can we learn about building context-driven, ethical, and inclusive AI systems that reflect local needs and values?
Thank you so much for the question. I think one of the things that we've been trying to learn, we have a couple of lessons, and one of them is that we've learned that ethical AI has to begin with local relevance. For example, the data that reflects our realities and the models that are designed with and not for the communities that they'll serve. The second one is that ethics looks like, for us, it looks like we are trying to what is it called, reflect the needs of people like farmers who see, for example, let's say you are coming up with an app or solution for a farmer, and the ethics must be lived and not just written. So we need ethical processes, and that means involving civil society, like what Nelson is talking about, educators, policymakers, and the local people like teachers and farmers, as I'm saying, because adoption, even from where I see it has to happen organically, and it's inclusion in practice. And so for us, that's one of the second lesson. The third one means inclusion to us, or to me, means rethinking what expertise looks like. So we've seen that you cannot just put people who are coding or the nerds together to build ethical AI. So we're trying to see if we could bring in anthropologists, linguistics, creatives, behavioral scientists into our work, because they will help us understand, one, human behavior, and the cultural nuance, as what Nelson is saying. Like, some of the things is like a wildfire. Once it catches, we may not even know how to, or how fast it's going to spread, and we cannot even stop it. The fourth lesson that we've learned is that data equity is justice. So if the data used to train AI doesn't represent African voices, for example, then the systems built on it will continue building or reproducing bias at a very large scale. And so we're working to change that by helping organizations kind of like help build data systems that reflect our African societies. And finally, we've seen innovation and ethics should go hand in hand, because when you center people, not just for performance, AI now becomes a tool of empowerment. So, for example, we are trying to see if organizations can rethink their processes, improve their decision making, and bridge access gaps in education, like what Nelson was saying, in terms of literacy and public services. So, from where I see it, building ethical and inclusive AI is really more not just innovation, it's about sustaining it. Because when we root AI in the context, culture, and care, in the African context, for example, it becomes a force for just transformation and not just another technological progress or process. So that's how I can answer that question.
Thank you so much, Shi. And it's interesting because literacy came up again a lot yesterday and it's coming up a lot today as well. So maybe we can chat a little bit more about that afterwards. But that was something that people were really interested in understanding is like, how are we improving AI literacy across the board and most specifically for people who are furthest from opportunity. So perhaps we can dive into that a little bit later. But now I'm going to move on to our final question. And this will be for all of our panelists. But I also just want to let the folks listening know that you can use the Q&A function to share your questions for the panelists. We'll have time for a few questions after this last one. So just preparing, if you have any questions that you want to ask, please put them in the Q&A and I'll make sure to ask them to our panelists. I don't believe you'll be able to unmute yourself, so we do need them in the Q&A in order to see them. So for our last question, for all of the panelists, in the spirit of global solidarity, how can we better support each other across borders, movements, or sectors in resisting harmful AI and building ethical alternatives? I'm going to start this time with Renji.
Thanks. So thinking about this question, I've come up with just four things that, four concrete ways that we can, four concrete ways to build solidarity. So number one, it really comes down to sharing resources and not just rhetoric. So we should be translating policy wins, toolkits, and strategies across geographies, contexts, and cultures. And Shi, I really like how you put context, culture, and care. So I think I'm going to be adding care to how I position this as well too. Number two, I think more practically, it's fighting vendor lock-in together. Coordinating against big tech dependencies affecting civil society globally. Like in short, we're all dealing with the same big tech companies creating AI dependencies. And so the vendor lock-in problem is not just localized for Canada, for example, it is global. So this means as a global collective, we can coordinate on collective advocacy for open models, interoperable systems, data portability requirements. We can build shared infrastructure, model cards, risk assessment frameworks, procurement guidelines that work across different contexts. So this is where the translation piece comes in. When we're all facing the same corporate players, coordinated resistance is more powerful. So I think that's number two. And number three, continuing to amplify each other's voices, and especially coming from the global north, from Canada, centering global South leadership and youth-led innovation. Amplifying voices doing sophisticated AI governance work in places that are quote unquote excluded from the AI leader conversations typically. So we need more connective infrastructure, organizations that can translate work from one context and making it legible in another. And then, lastly, build lasting relationships in this ecosystem and not just crisis responses when things are going bad. It's not about one-off webinars or bringing together diverse stakeholders because there's an immediate crisis. It's about building sustained relationships across movements, across geographies, across contexts. And so one of the things that I've also been thinking about, and we think about this a lot at May, is that the governance frameworks that are being written in real time right now will shape decades of technological development. And if we want justice, equity, and global solidarity embedded in these systems, this theme has popped up a number of times in this conversation. We need to be in the rooms where they're being written and not as afterthoughts or tokens, but as co-creators. And this requires resource capacity and most importantly, recognizing that communities most affected by AI systems are really also the experts on how to govern them justly.
Thank you, Renji. I think that's a really great point, especially for the folks who are joining today, because I think it's a bit of a call to action around how we can do this work better as organizations who are not traditionally part of this discussion or not considered leaders in this space. So really appreciate those reflections. I'll pass it over to Shi to share your reflections on this question.
Thank you. I think the first way that I believe we can support each other is one through knowledge solidarity, because we create open learning pathways so that civil societies, educators, and innovators can all understand everywhere, can understand and influence AI. And so we've seen how projects like AI literacy, when we empower organizations to question systems and demand transparency, we co-create alternatives that serve the people better. And the second one is data solidarity, because when we ensure that the data sets that are driving global AI, they continue to reflect our diverse contexts and communities, because we've seen there are many voices and values missing from the data. And in the future, that doesn't even look nice. So we need partnerships that actually help people build ethical data ecosystems across the borders. The third one is movement solidarity. So we need to connect social justice advocates, policymakers, technologists, and creatives. And we can all call out and come together and resist harmful AI technologies, because whether it's biased, like I was listening to yesterday's webinar, and a lot came up about AI weapons of, let me call them weapons of war or surveillance. And for me, biased surveillance, we've seen the dangers and the damage that it's caused, exploitive labor. It was a question that was brought up yesterday, and also exclusion design. And these are not local problems; they continue to be global ones. So for me, we must really, I believe, we must really include that movement solidarity as part of this. And finally, I believe that we must embrace collaborative innovation. Because when we come together and co-design tools and policies that continue to center humans, the justice and human dignity, we really have to really consider that this is what ethical AI is. It's not built in labs; it's really built in communities. So let's continue to build bridges and not silos to make AI a shared good and not a shared risk. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Shia. I really appreciate those reflections. And I think everyone, all three of you mentioned that co-creation piece is so important and human-centered piece is so important. So it definitely is resonating. And like you said, talked a lot about yesterday as well, around how we can mitigate some of the harmful impacts of AI. And Nelson, any reflections on this question from your end?
I think most of it has been said. I'll just add a piece on legislation, because here in Africa, across African countries, we're now trying to find legislations that can help govern AI, both from the sides of kind of the development of it, but also from the part of trying to stop the harmful impact of AI. And one of the things that you see now, like a lot of these global companies, as much as they do due diligence, like for example, Europe is very tight in terms of legislation. Europe is because they have a unified European legislation framework, and also they have framework through the GDPR and the rest and successive regulations that try to protect the consumers. In Africa, everyone is doing everything. And I think a lot of these companies also utilize the lack of uniformity in legislation to probably experiment and run a lot of things that otherwise wouldn't have been accepted in other markets. So the push now across the continent is, first of all, to have legislation that is progressive, that is kind of adaptive to the different changes, but also centers data protection and personal data at the center of it. I remember some of the discussions that happened when some of the revelations from Meta came. I think before then, Meta just had facial recognition rolled out across its platform as if there is nothing about it. People at the time thought that it would not be possible to reverse it, but through the discussions and the revelations that came from the whistleblower and the rest, Meta had to disable. They said, you know what, the harms that come from the facial recognition technology that we deployed across our platform is too great for us to allow this to be to continue. And that's what led to Meta disabling the facial recognition technology across its platforms. And this is just one example. What other things are happening? Because that one we can see, but what other malpractice is happening without the civil society or even governments getting hints of it? Or even at times, our legislators, that's a problem that we face here in Africa, or let me say in South Sudan, for example. But I think it's also you relate to in Canada or in the US. The judges and the legislators, they're like too old and too out of touch with whatever is happening with this technology. So it is very hard for them to grasp it. And the young people who are probably using and understanding this technology, they do not have the power whether through the legislation, the judiciary, or through the executive branch of the governments. So this is also a push that we are trying to do here to ensure that there is more representation.
Thank you, Nelson. I really appreciate your thoughts on that and for providing that kind of concrete example. But definitely that power piece, I think, Renji, you spoke to it as well, is a big challenge. And obviously not just for AI, it's kind of a broader challenge that's really impacting why certain communities are excluded. So I really appreciate all of your thoughts on that. I just want to remind the folks here to put your questions in the chat, and now we'll be able to move to your questions for the panelists. So while you're coming up with your questions, you can just click the Q&A box. You'll be able to put them in there and I will ask them to our panelists. I actually have 2 questions, so I'll start off with those, and then as folks add them, we can ask them more. The first question that I had for all of you is you all kind of mentioned that this AI literacy part is very important to bridging that gap and making sure that this kind of global solidarity exists, because there are people who are systemically excluded, but also people who are kind of self-excluding because of a lack of access to AI literacy. So I was wondering if any of you or all of you have seen any good examples of implementing AI literacy in a way that reaches those folks who are not historically included. Like, do you have any tools, resources, stories, or even just ideas of how we can do this better in your different contexts or even in a global context? Anyone can answer this one, or all of you.
I think I thought someone else, but maybe let me share some examples. So we have there are 2 groups in Africa. There is a group called I for Policy. It's kind of a think tank, but a bit of think tank, a bit of hackathons. So kind of a combination of both. So they do a lot of progressive policy across the continent. And it's a group that involves many people from the different African countries that push for AI literacy and AI governance. They've been doing really, really awesome work, especially in Rwanda. They introduced very nice and progressive kind of legislation in the country, and they also create white papers and templates that anyone can use in order to run very quick AI literacy training, or also to introduce people to a bit of AI, or to build a small language model that can adapt to your community. And that's an example that I saw to be, because a lot of the issues that we face here it's not that people don't have the ability. People need to be shown how to implement and how to learn. I think a lot of people already understand the other structures, but they just need to be shown how to learn and how to adapt to some of these new technologies.
Amazing. I'd love to see an example, like a concrete one, because I think it really helps to show for the folks listening who might not be familiar with this, what works. But you had an example as well?
Yeah, so I think I have 3 examples. So one, I helped co-create a school called the African Women's School of AI. And so the aim of the school is to just help women understand AI from the basic stages to the highest level of the nerd. And then there's another one, there's a program called Women Elevate. This is really one of those hands-on programs I've also taken up. It's a AI literacy program for women only. This is our second one. And then the third one is what we are coming up with at AIverse. So currently we are trying to map out Mauritius to see the gaps that are missing in AI literacy. Maybe the question would be why Mauritius is because they express interest fast. Well, when we threw things on the wall and they stuck fast there. So the plan was to have an EAC kind of like school. But then for us, we've learned that we're trying to really move it in different directions. But then those are the examples I can give for now.
That's a really good question. I can add too. I think that's a really good question, Sydney, because I've been thinking a lot about this as well. And I'll put this into context with the State of AI Ethics report that we're putting together and how we came about this, because one of the things that we're finding is a lot of people are trying to find an entry point into this. I think, Nelson was talking about access or making it accessible and an entry point into this whole space. What we're finding at least what I found over the past year. I'll give you an example. A friend reached out and asked if they had resources, if we had any resources now that they've joined a nonprofit focused on the environment, on what they could do to start crafting an AI policy for their nonprofit. And the reality is, I'm sure there are a lot of examples. Me as, leader of this, and this institute, the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, we're trying to build a repository. We're trying to build examples of what some of these policies could look like. And it led me to rehashing this publication, the State of AI Ethics Report, being able to pull some of these stories and examples together. So with the SAYER, the motivating, one of the biggest motivations behind this is that a lot of people are asking questions. And I think this speaks to what literacy is, right? So it's understanding within their context, whether it's within the context of governance or AI, disentangling AI safety, AI alignment, AI ethics, or even within democracy, within algorithmic justice, within healthcare, what some of these examples are, who's doing work in this space, and being able to share that. And so we're coming out with the State of AI Ethics Report for November 4th. It's a State of AI Ethics Report for 2025, just getting a sense of where things are at in this whole conversation. I know a lot of I hope it answers. I hope it answers some of these questions, but I feel like it'll there will be a lot more questions coming out of it as a result. So I think that's where I'm coming from in terms of when I think of just AI literacy examples. I think we're still very much in the early stages of, as communities, we're trying to figure it out, and we're trying to build these connective networks formally through webinars like this, but informally as well, as people start recognizing that they need to work together for this.
Amazing, and definitely have to read that report when it comes out in a couple of weeks, because I think that those are some really interesting questions to grapple with, and particularly in the Canadian context of how we can make sure that AI governance and that those ethics are top of mind in our work. I have another question here in the chat, but I'm going to use my moderator privileges and ask my second question that I had. For a little bit of context for me, I came from the tech space. So I used to work at Shopify. I know some people in Canada probably know that, or maybe outside of Canada as well. And now I'm back working in the nonprofit kind of charitable NGO space. And I have to say the contrast between those two spaces of kind of big-ish tech. I know Shopify in Canada is big tech, maybe in the bigger ocean of things smaller. And then the conversation that nonprofits and charities are having are very different. I think big tech and any tech company is hyper-focused on AI innovation without maybe thinking about the human element or the ethical element or the environmental element, whereas charities, nonprofits, and NGOs are kind of on the opposite end of being what I think is too cautious, and definitely taking into account the important risks like the human risks, the inequities that you talked about, definitely the environmental footprint. But I worry about those organizations really being left behind, as you've all mentioned. So I wonder if all of you or any of you have comments or advice that you would give to nonprofits, charities, and NGOs that are really hesitant for very valid reasons to really engage in using AI ethically, but also advocating for ethical AI. Do you have any advice you would give to those organizations? Because I think there's a huge hesitance from organizations to really be part of this conversation or using these tools. So if any of you have advice, please do share.
I think if I could jump in for this too, with nonprofits especially, I would encourage you to think of how you operate as an organization in terms of workflows, in terms of beginning to experiment with some of the tools that exist, and just understanding how it all works within the context of some of the questions that were asked here today. Where is the data coming? Or taking a step back, and think to yourself, if AI is a tool, right? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish? you can't just say, hey, we need to adopt AI because everybody's adopting AI. What does it actually mean? So looking at the context within which you're looking to have an impact, what is the end result? And then looking at the workflows to get to that end result, and then being able to say, could some of these AI tools help? What does it look like? And then if we're going to put guardrails, for example, where, if you're dealing with, in the healthcare or vulnerable sector, ensuring that you're not uploading sensitive, personally identifiable information into whatever LLM or tool that you're using, and making that clear, right? So I think I would start from there. I would start with what are you hoping to accomplish? What does your workflow look like? Can some of these tools help you get there? And then if we're going to be adopting some of these tools, what are some guardrails or policies that we should, in effect, have in place? But then also recognizing that as you're looking to implement some of these policies, it's operationalizing that, and part of that operationalization process comes with training. So then being able to bring in some outside expertise or community-led trainers to help everyone within the organization situate themselves within the context of how these tools are used. So that's how I frame the approach if I was advising a nonprofit in the space.
Thank you, Renji. That's so practical and really helpful. So I appreciate you sharing that approach. And Nelson and She, did you have any advice that you would give to organizations? I know you're doing this work quite a bit as well, She especially. So I don't know if you have any recommendations to add.
Actually, yes. Just to add on what Renji is saying. So one of the things that we are learning to do is when we find organizations that are hesitant about integrating AI, the first thing we do is let them know that we understand. And then we understand that the hesitation is coming from a place of fear, a place of job losses, complexities, replacing the human touch. We're implementing an approach to some of our clients, and we're calling it look before you leap. And so this is what means is like we give them an experience of how that would look like for them, like what Renji was saying. First is to understand what problems are they really trying to solve. Two, how can AI support them, not disrupt them? And three, what systems and people need to be empowered and not replaced? Because we've learned that unless we define the fear and we acknowledge the fear, and then we help them look, they will not make the jump. We had a meetup, Tech and AI meetup, and the question everyone was asking us is, we don't want to even talk about this because we are afraid we are going to lose our jobs. And so the common pattern of people raising that issue is the reason why we've come up with a framework called looking before you leap. So that's how I can answer that question.
Thank you, She. Really appreciate those examples. And I think, like you said, around how it can help versus how it can, hinder or replace work. I think especially with charities and nonprofits that usually are quite stretched thin, like not necessarily able to push the dollar as far as those large companies, there's actually a lot of opportunity to not replace people, but actually just make our organizations more efficient, more effective, and allow us to focus on what makes us different and really focus on that advocacy work. I think the biggest challenge, though, that is hard to address right now is the environmental footprint. I remember doing an AI training with the Jane Goodall Institute here in Canada, and I let them know how much fresh water is being used to cool data centers and things like that. And they were surprised. And I was like, yeah, I mean, you're a conservation organization, so it's definitely a consideration. And I remember, I don't remember who it was, but I went to a talk and someone said an advantage that humans will always have over computers is that we require a lot less energy, just some food, some water, a bit of sleep, and we're able to make brilliant ideas and come up with brilliant concepts. Unfortunately, computers need a lot more than that. So great reflections. Nelson, did you have anything to add or any examples that you'd like to share? Oh, I think Nelson might be frozen. So we'll wait for him to come back. But I just want to, there's one question in the chat as well as a comment. So I'm going to read the comment first just to see if there's any reflections from the panelists that are here. And then we'll go on to the question as well. Two questions now. Okay, perfect. So comment from the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation. Just a comment, generational discrimination, self-discrimination is isolating a generation who themselves easily say that they did not grow up with it. So leave it to the young. Same with AI. People need to know if, why, and to what degree AI can or cannot be important for them to understand, even without becoming a user. That it's not just about whether one individual is using AI or not. So it's engagement, even if not fully literacy, intentionally reaching out to those otherwise turn their back with an easy out of saying that it's for the next generations. And this is said as a member of an older generation myself. This actually came up yesterday for anyone who was here. We often talk about AI literacy for youth, but we don't really talk about how it's important for older people as well, even seniors who are no longer in the workforce, because AI is becoming part of health systems and lots of different things that they're still interacting with. So I wonder, She and Renji, if you had any comments on that kind of mentality, I guess, and how we can combat that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, thinking through within the AI literacy context and recognizing, the earlier call for like a national AI literacy strategy, this is where different approaches for different population groups are going to be needed, right? So what does it look like? What does an AI literacy approach for kindergarten to like high school or even college students look like? What does it look like for, mid-career folks that are training or getting some retraining to switch different careers, for older folks that are, as you mentioned, Sydney, with a lot of government systems, healthcare, pensions, access to those types of services, they're going to be AI driven at some point. For older folks, they're going to need to understand how does it impact them, what can they do about it. And I think the one thing that I also would add to this conversation, as more and more of these systems are interacting with our lives on a daily basis, being able to understand, what does accountability look like? And then when you are harmed by some of these systems, whether it's in healthcare, misdiagnose, or like for a credit rating, and it inadvertently gives you a credit rating based on your postal code, for example, that there are ways of redress, that there are ways to like be able to hold some of these systems accountable, and making people understand what that looks like. So I think when we talk about AI literacy and a strategy and approach, it's not just for quote unquote young people, but it's for different populations across the board. And I think this is where community led, depending on the type of community too, training comes into place, because different contexts, different locations are going to different locations are going to have different contexts, and that's going to be important to get that information, to get that context, culture right. So I would say that, you could say that, the easy thing would be to say, I'll leave it for the young people to figure it out. But it's really, if you have literacy strategy and AI literacy strategy in place, you'd be addressing different groups across the board.
Great response, and really interesting also question from BCCIC. So thank you for sharing that. She, did you have anything to add around AI literacy for different age groups and what that could look like?
It's almost disruptive a bit, because what that is we're calling it generational self-exclusion, based on what we've seen or the conversations that we've had. We've seen people opt out of learning, of engaging with AI, not because they're not capable of it, but because they're convinced in a way that it's not meant for them. We've had conversations with people who are saying, we are the Gen X, so that's millennial, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha stuff. And so for us, we're trying to make them understand that AI literacy is not about technical training. It's about belonging, because at the end of the day, it continues to shape the services we access, the jobs we hold, and even the policies that continue to govern us. So my role also as a comms person is even trying to storytell, because at the end of the day, you have to bring in every way to make them understand what inclusion is. So we are a bit biased on our training programs, because as much as AI affects everyone, we've seen the responsive of the people who are kind of like more inquiring about the literacy programs, and we find that it's more of probably the Gen X really who really want to, let me use this one, look cool at work, and they say, oh, I can use AI nicely and I know all this stuff. So that's that section. Then there's the millennials. But there are other people who really claim that they don't want to be part of this AI. They're calling it AI business. So I think for us, it's about going beyond being a user and trying to explain and make them understand that AI is about being informed enough to say, to have a say in, I like AI to be designed like this, to be deployed like this, and to be governed like this. So that's my input when it comes to what we are calling generational self-exclusion.
Thank you so much, Gia. I love that approach as well. And we're still waiting for Nelson to come back, so I guess I can add my 2 cents to this as well. When I do any AI trainings, when I hear this question come up, it's really interesting because I think this boom of talking about AI is really driven by generative AI. But I always tell people, I actually start my trainings with a quiz at the beginning. And one of the questions, now it'll be spoiled for any of you who come to a training, but is when was the term artificial intelligence coined? And a lot of people guess pretty recently, but the answer is 1956. So if you were alive between now and 1956, then yeah, AI has been around for that long, or at least the idea and the concept of artificial intelligence has been coined since then. So as unfortunately with a lot of technology, it was kind of birthed out of the Second World War. And so it's something when that kind of technological innovation was coming around by governments and militaries, artificial intelligence was already being discussed then. So don't count yourself out. You might be an AI OG and you don't know about it. So a really great question though, and great reflections as well. We have a bunch of questions coming up in the chat, so I'll move on to the next one. First is from Judy Annette. So how do you see the next few years looking in the context of AI and the global solidarity justice space? So what are you anticipating maybe in the next 5 years?
I can jump in. I would situate that question, Judy, and it's a really good question too, within what's happening in terms of the larger global governance movements that we're seeing. And we've written about this. I've covered this in the AI ethics brief, but it's worth bringing up the different approaches, right? So, in short, you've got the U.S. with their AI action plan, looking to deregulate and leave everything to industry, right? And we've seen how that goes. China, where their governance AI action plan are looking to be more cooperative, but it's still very much state controlled. You've got the EU taking a risk-based approach with their EU AI Act. And I think what we're seeing is these global powers trying to establish how AI governance is going to be, and that's going to set the tone for everyone else around the world. I think what we could do, so that trajectory is going on in parallel to the solidarity and the justice track. And I think what we could see happen on this end is more interconnectivity between civil society organizations, more learnings, the sharing of knowledge, data, and resources, the sharing of practical, like we're very big on the practical tools and practical approaches. And earlier, I think you mentioned it, or was it Nelson? It was like AI ethics isn't done in a lab; it's in communities, and I really believe that. Like we really believe that building up civic competence is the foundation for all of this. Building up AI literacy and an understanding of the world for every citizen is going to get us there. So I could see that larger global governance and politics happening on one end, but then you've got this undercurrent of civil society organizations being to organize, get involved, get connected, share resources, and find both formal but also informal pathways of making this work around justice, equity, and solidarity much more strengthened in so many different ways. So that's how I see it shaping up. What that looks like, we'll have to see, but that's how I see these two tracks going.
Amazing. Thank you, Renji. And I just want to point out also Nelson is back here. So I'll just reiterate the question as well in case she and Nelson, you want to add reflections. How do you see the next few years looking in the context of AI and the global solidarity/justice space? So what do you see coming up in the next few years? I don't know, if you had any reflections before I pass it to Nelson. I'll give him a bit of time to settle back in.
Sure. I think that's a very interesting question because I'm just going to also add to what Renji is saying. So for us, or I see two parallel futures unfolding. One, we could see AI development concentrated in the hands of the few people, where it can be built far from the context that they affect. And we find that probably the global south will remain mostly a testing ground or a data source. And so that continues to threaten justice, solidarity, and it will repeat historical patterns of exclusion. But there's a really interesting possibility future where we can all co-create. As Rachel was saying, we really need to come together. And so the future for us is where AI becomes context-driven and community-led, where probably people in Nairobi, Kigali, or Juba continues not just to be users, but also architects of AI. And so for me, or for us, I think the movement will see it should focus really more on even the movement should really be more or less critical and more on capacity building. And because if we build the skills and institutions and networks, we will allow these communities to come on board and shape AI with their voices, their images, and with their interests. So for me, those are the two parallels that I see happening in the near future.
Thank you, Shi. I think both you and Renji are giving us good realism with a little bit of optimism. So I appreciate that. Nelson, did you have anything you want to share around what you see and how it's impacting the global solidarity and justice space?
I think definitely. I think more awareness. I mean, irrespective of what someone feels about the Palestinian cause, you could see like it took longer time, but now there is awareness, both sides of the whatever discussions. I think there is also a place for such stuff. Like when you look at the environmental movement, it's taken long for the knowledge to dissipate to the public in a manner that people can understand it. But I think with the AI and democratization of knowledge, there is a possibility also that a lot of this can have a global reach, especially for such causes. I really feel like right now there is a time, especially for the environmental movement. I mean, out of all the other movement, I think they can leverage AI to probably now push the knowledge and the awareness and bridge the awareness gap and also bridge the action gap, because a lot of the issues that we have with the causes that people are advocating for globally is that maybe some people are aware, but very few are taking the actions. So I think now probably this is the time now to some of these causes to find more people, more younger people who are able to take the flag and also to take the actions in probably ways that are more meaningful than we might think of. And if anything that technology has proven over the last few years is that it's very hard to predict. And that's why you saw Meta like 2-3 years ago, they put about 10 billion on the metaverse and then had to make a swift U-turn about it just 2 and 3 years later. And that's a big company. And I think talk less of some of us who run small organizations. So there could be very big seismic shifts that very few of us could predict. But the good thing is that if we're able to learn, if we're able to adapt, it will be better.
That's a great point, Nelson. You never actually know what's coming up, especially with how quickly these things are changing. We have a few more questions, so I think we'll be able to answer all of them. The next one's from Mateo, and Mateo asks, what can or should civil society organizations in the global north be doing more of to address or counter inequalities perpetuated or caused by AI use? Actually, you all touched on this a little bit in your last response, but did you have anything else to add around what organizations in Canada or the global north can do?
In terms of that, I think probably try to hold these companies go into this. Sorry, I think my network. Am I back?
It's okay. You're back now. Oh. Okay, you're back. There you are.
I think trying to hold some of these companies accountable, because a lot of the companies and these multinationals, they are not registered in jurisdiction where we can hold them accountable. Most of them are either registered in the US, primarily the US, some in Canada and in Europe. So it is very hard. At times, some of the voices that are on the ground here, some of the voices that are in the global south, can barely reach anywhere. You can imagine a company like Meta or a company like OpenAI can easily be summoned by a senator from Virginia or from whatever to come and answer. Meanwhile, like a whole country like India or a country like South Africa can barely send them even a letter for them to respond to. So I think there is a lot of agency in the hands of some of these organizations in order to amplify voices in places where representation is very hard.
Great call to action. I think that's something that everyone here or everyone who is in the global north can take on board. Let's advocate and make sure that we're making sure those voices are heard. Shi or Benji, did you have any thoughts on this one?
I can add, and if I might be, oh, sorry, Shi, do you want to go?
No, you go first.
Sure. So I can add too, and if I might be so bold to say, sometimes civil society organizations in the global north, we're often part of the problem, even when we think we're part of the solution. And I think we should start by acknowledging that. I think part of it is, we develop these frameworks and governance tools in the global north and in Toronto and London and New York and in these cities, and then we export them. Instead, we really need to flip it on its head and start to support local governance. So shifting it from how do we bring our AI solutions or frameworks or risk management frameworks so on to the global south, and instead, how do we resource communities to develop their own governance frameworks and choose their own tools? That would be the first thing. And the second thing, I mentioned this earlier too, and I think it's worth repeating, it's addressing vendor lock-in and data sovereignty, right? Because the global north, I think Nelson mentioned this, like with these big tech companies holding them to account, but they're also inadvertently creating dependencies on some of these with some of their platforms and the tools that they're building. So that's the second. And the third, it's share resources and not just reports. And I talked about the State of AI Ethics report earlier too. Part of it is we're really trying to build it out as a resource that people can use, can reference, a playbook of sorts. I know that we're just getting this off the ground after a 3-year hiatus, but I think working along those stop exporting solutions, start supporting local governance, addressing vendor lock-in, and then sharing resources too, would be one way that civil society organizations in the global north can support the work that's happening in the south.
I think I'll add to what both of them have said. And I think one, for me, what I believe is that when I think about AI safety, I think about it in 2 dimensions: internal governance and external impact. So internally, I believe safety should begin with the people using and deploying these systems and not with the machines themselves. And so this is about building AI awareness and accountability systems within their own operations. I don't know how practical that could be, but that's one of the internal ways to do it. Externally is what Nelson is saying, but then probably he's more brutal than we could be, because for me, it believes it's demanding transparency from the partners and supporting open data principles and co-developing safety frameworks within communities rather than importing them. So it's more, how could we show them or practice solidarity through standards? So that's what Nelson was saying in terms of holding them accountable. So I think that's how I can answer that question.
If I could add to that as well too, because I think that that internal capacity is really important, as she's saying. I think one practical way too that society organizations across the board could work on AI safety is developing procurement guidelines and not simply accepting quote unquote AI safety from the tech vendors that are promising all sorts of things, right? So you need to ask for documentation, ask about testing in the context in which you're operating in, right? Whether it's in your city, your country, your continent, and then ask about data sovereignty, vendor lock-in, what happens when things go wrong, and then being able to keep all of that in mind as you're building out the tools, the workflows, the processes that work for your organization. So I would keep the vendor procurement. That I think is a very practical thing that you can do, but is it's an important but sometimes overlooked. So I would keep that in mind.
Great point. And I think that came up a little bit yesterday, but not in this amount of detail. So really appreciate you adding that to the conversation. And so you actually answered one of the other questions that was in here around AI safety. So I'll skip to the last question. And it was, if civil society organizations are creating AI policies for the organizations, what do you feel are the key aspects that need to be included? So Renji, you already spoke around vetting vendors and really holding them to account, but are there any other, maybe each of you could recommend one of the key aspects that you would ask an organization to have in their policies?
I think I can add.
Nelson, go please.
Yeah, let me add. I think one of the things I usually advise, especially smaller organizations, is to not to try to procure or sign up to like a lot of smaller narrow AI tools. Instead of, especially for resource, just to utilize your resources, and also for learning curve. You don't want, Ranji was talking about vendor lock-in. You don't want to go into like especially things that are not tested. You see people like, this is an AI for modifying this is an AI for modifying that. So it's better to go with something that is general purpose, but also can kind of attend to most of the needs that you have. And I think that's actually better at the beginning, because there's a lot of narrow AI utilization that is still not tested and not robust. You might end up locking a lot of your data on it, or even moving your team into something. Before that can stabilize, then you want to move them into learning something else. So I think in general, but also this also applies to AI knowledge. It is better to have overall basic knowledge that will also help you in terms of making a choice or making comparative analysis for you and your team as well, as opposed to just diving deep into a narrow specific AI tool. I'll stop here.
I can add as well too. I would also think about mapping your policies to the AI development lifecycle, right? So the design, the development, the deployment, but also the decommissioning of some of these AI systems, and asking questions where you stand as an organization with each one. So the design aspect, you do an internal audit. What are we trying to achieve? So going back to my earlier, comments around what is the outcome that you're hoping for? Who are we designing this for? What assumptions are built in? What harms could happen if things go wrong? And then in the development phase, what data are we taking into account? What context is this, highlighting, or is it overlooking, and so on in the design development deployment stage when it gets deployed? What does it look like in practice? Is this AI system that we're using, or some of these tools, is it actually working as intended, or are there some unintended consequences? And then having policies in place to know that if certain things happen, or if it's not as relevant anymore, to decommission that, because what does sunsetting the system look like? So I would map out these policies to that AI lifecycle.
I think to add to what both of them have said, I think I'll add to one key aspect is establishing structures for oversight. For example, whether it could be an AI ethics committee, cross-departmental review process, or an external advisory group, because someone really has to be responsible for ensuring that AI decisions align with organizational mission and values. And I think the other one is human oversight and transparency. And so this makes it clear that AI should argument, not replace human judgment. So staff and partners should really understand that AI systems make decisions on and how to challenge and override them when need be. And I think those are the two things that I'd probably like to add to what Nelson and Reggie said.
Thank you so much, Renji, Nelson. Really incredible reflections. And I think what was really valuable from this conversation is how practical a lot of these recommendations are. I think myself included, but everybody who's listening here has something that they can go back to their work, to their organization, or even just maybe to their kitchen table to talk a little bit more about how we can be engaged and active in the governance of AI in our context, but also things, ways we can adopt AI, ways we can continue to be critical of it. So I really just want to say a big thank you. I think that's the sign of a good webinar is when people can go away and be like, oh, I can actually do this right away. So really appreciate you sharing all of your experience. This brings us to the end of our discussion today, but before I pass it back over to Solange, I want to do my regular spiel of thank yous. I think it's important to thank folks for their time. So again, just want to thank Nelson, Shi, and Renji for sharing your experience with us and really just bringing us to those practical solutions that we're going to be able to implement in our different spheres. So big thank you for being here and really thank you for sharing your experience as well. Also want to thank our interpreters who were making sure that this conversation is available in English and French. Really valuable work and we really appreciate you taking the time to make this conversation more accessible for everyone here. And then finally, just want to thank the ICN team as always. I appreciate you inviting me to be part of these conversations and really think that the discussions that we're having, including all the attendees today and your questions, really just is super inspiring. It's like the highlight of my month when I get to have these conversations with all of you. And big thank you to everyone who listened today and then shared their questions and experiences and even just your candid comments. I think it's really valuable to hear that this is something that you're grappling with and that this conversation was helpful for your own thinking. So big thank you again, everyone, and I will pass it to Solange to close us out.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you for guiding these discussions with clarity and professionalism. And thank you to participants, presenters, and our ICN and Council team, as well as our interpreters. But before we go, I would like to invite you to please take a moment to complete our feedback form shared in the chat. And also feel free to subscribe to ICN newsletter and follow us and the councils on social media to stay engaged and be part of ongoing conversations. Again, thank you all.
Thanks,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you all.
Take care.